Morning.
Everybody. I'm Peter Bazalgette, Chair of Arts Council England. I'd like to welcome you to Sadler's Wells. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for what I think will be one of the most important speeches I'll make as Chair of the Arts Council. Today, I'm committing the organisation, which belongs to all of us, to a fundamental shift in its approach to diversity. The plain fact is that despite many valuable, well-intentioned policies over the past decade, when it comes to diversity, we've not achieved what we intended. We're not doing well enough. What do I mean by that? Well, we fund art and culture with public money for the benefit of all. So the work we support should draw on all Britain's talents. Britain's got many, many talents, and our work should reflect and engage with all our talent and communities. That's how we'll ensure work of true ambition and enduring quality. For years, we've tried to promote diversity without grasping just how complex it is. For example, we thought hard about improving the overall employment figure for diversity, but probably did not grasp how important it was to resource the leadership programs that would drive sustainable change. And we concentrated on BME-led organizations. Fine. But as a consequence, we didn't nurture diversity in all our work across all our funded organizations and their audiences. We need to think about programming, the workforce, leadership, and audiences, and how all of these are interrelated. We all agree that we can and must do better. I'm going to say how this morning by outlining some new initiatives, and I'll also reaffirm some existing ones. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about our changing society and our cultural traditions. As you know, every 10 years the UK has a census. They're still extrapolating the data from 2011, but the headline figures give us a broad picture of today's society. The generalized figures don't necessarily tell us the stories of particular communities, though. In 2001, for example, around 88% of the population identified themselves as white British. In 2011, 10 years later, that was down to 80%. But look within that figure, and you see how varied our nation is. For instance, in London, just 45% of respondents are now white British. The headline statistic tells us that the Muslim population has risen from 3% to around 5%, and that those identifying as Christian have declined from 72% to 59%. But in Tower Hamlets in East London, more than 34% of the population is now Muslim, while in Knowsley on Merseyside, more than 80% of the population remains Christian. The point of this is to remind ourselves that headline figures do not describe specific communities. There are many different stories out there and many different contexts for this word diversity. And this heterogeneous quality has long been true of our culture. People endlessly debate the essential quality of Englishness. But if there's one thing above all that sums up Englishness, it's the richness of our diversity. If I may, my own name was French 250 years ago and Arabic 1250 years ago. Our most significant art does not come from any English or British production line. It comes from individual talent reaching to their particular history and circumstances. Reacting to their particular circumstance and history. That's what we do so well. Much of our national culture has been created through the insight of those who once stood outside, who've come to Britain from other countries, or those whose perspective and voices have not always been included in the mainstream. For example, who made A Canterbury Tale, that most English of films? Powell and Pressburger, of course. The latter came from Hungary via Paris in reaction to anti-Semitism. Which film better captured 1980s Britain than My Beautiful Laundrette, written by Hanif Kureishi, born in Bromley to a Pakistani father and an English mother? Which novel better described our society on the cusp of the new millennium than White Teeth, by Zadie Smith, the child of a Jamaican mother and an English father? And last year, Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave, An Anatomy of Our Shared History, became the first film directed and produced by a black filmmaker to win an Oscar for Best Picture. As you'll all know, McQueen is a Turner Prize-winning artist who was born in London to Grenadian parents. And think of the extraordinary elegiac display of ceramic poppies around the Tower of London, something that I think will probably be remembered in 100 years' time, that is 200 years after the First World War. So extraordinary was it. An act of remembrance that caught the imagination of the world, actually, not just this country. Now, that's the work, of course, of Paul Cummins, who was one of the Disabled Artists Commission for the Cultural Olympiad. Periodically, our national culture gets a shake-up, a paradigm shift, when those outside the establishment kick their way into the room. Think of the eruption of the working classes into writing, theatre, television and film in the 50s and 60s. Think of punk in the 70s, or young British artists in the 90s. Each of these movements rejuvenated our arts and galvanized our society. They gave real power to a new generation of artists. The question is, when we live in such a diverse society with such potential, how can we release that next wave of creative energy? And the point is that it's in the arts that we should see this first. It's our job. A general perception is that our arts have been in excellent creative health, despite the financial strictures of recent years. Artists and organizations have responded brilliantly to repeated financial challenges. But a more detailed look shows that in some areas, we are vulnerable. We're not reacting fast enough to the changes in society. We need to reflect immigration and ethnicity and recognize that there are substantial parts of society that are still largely invisible. Disabled people, or older people, for example. 1 in 6 of the population is now over 65. All need to be brought into the national conversation. But in many ways, the arts have progressed, nevertheless. We have a generation of exceptional leaders from minority groups now heading companies of national significance. Jenny Seeley at Grey Eye, Kuli Tiari at Cast in Doncaster, Skinder Hudal at the New Art Exchange, Nottingham, and in London, Indira Bassingham at the Tricycle, Madani Younis at the Bush, and Kenneth Tharp at the Place. It's a fact that women outnumber men as leaders across the cultural sector, and we have influential, all-winning teams at some of our leading venues, such as the Royal Exchange Manchester, the Liverpool Everyman, and the Donmar Warehouse in London. When it comes to sexuality, the arts sector has been crucial in promoting rights and role models. We may have a long way to go in terms of disability arts, but remember the work of Unlimited and the Cultural Olympiad, for which Jenny Seeley was artistic advisor, as well as co-artistic director of the Paralympics opening ceremony. Think what that did for disabled and deaf artists. The work of Unlimited continues today. I enjoyed attending their excellent festival on the South Bank in London this September, as I did, by the way, enjoy the Dada Fest in Liverpool last week even, where not only was there a lively conference, there was also a great exhibition, and one of the best exhibits in the exhibition was an old invalid carriage turned into a piece of gold lame hanging from the ceiling perilously, and its creator is here today, I'm delighted to say. Generally, we're seeing the kind of work that wasn't happening 20 years ago. We've had writers like Gurpreet Bharti on stage at the Birmingham Rep, alongside a play written by and starring Lenny Henry. Collaborations like that between Akram Khan and Israel Galvan, Kathak meets flamenco. The emergence of artists like Hitain Patel or Yinki Shonabara. Cast's revival of Barry Hines' Kes in Doncaster, a professional and community retelling of a story that's so important to the town and its children. I've seen some especially memorable productions myself, like Josephine and I at the Bush, or the Tricycle's multiple award-winning Red Velvet, and indeed only a few weeks ago I enjoyed The House That Will Not Stand at the same venue. One of my highlights last year was Grey Eye's production of Iron Man, which I caught in Ipswich on the waterfront. And I also really loved Maxine Peaker's Hamlet at the Royal Exchange in Manchester a few weeks ago. So all this is inspiring and challenging work, but it's just a beginning. Diversity evolves as our communities evolve, and we have to respond to that. Identities are changing. For example, according to that 2011 census, The mixed-race population itself has climbed sharply to more than 1 million for the first time. So some of our definitions become smudged. The situation becomes more subtle. And in many post-industrial or rural areas, there are communities that are not defined by race, but by deprivation. Poverty that does not distinguish between black and white. So we must give opportunities to everyone, to the children of middle-class Asian parents, to the children of working-class white parents. As a society, if we don't use that diversity, we'll have a world with no social mobility, one that's shaped by static elites. Now, in economic terms, we have a creative sector that's growing at 3 times the rate of the economy. That creative sector needs ideas, it needs revenue streams, it needs audiences, many of which can come from this diverse society. As an arts and cultural sector, if we don't draw on that diversity, we'll lack new talent and fresh narratives. We will, as Jenny Seeley put it recently, become male, pale, and stale. So in talking about diversity, we're talking about the future of our arts and culture and our nation. It's an issue of national importance, and I think the political parties now all recognize this. Our new generation of cultural leaders come from different backgrounds and have different things to say, but they express common themes. One of these is that arts organizations must reflect their communities. As Indu at the Tricycle puts it, if you don't represent your community, how is your work authentic? And if you don't engage with the taxpayers, why should they fund you? But they also tell us that diversity is about who has power and how they deploy the available resources. They tell us to look at popular music and think why there's no question about diversity being an issue there. It's because resources are no issue. You can record and broadcast music in your own bedroom. So to some extent, the art we produce reflects who's in charge. And as Kuli Tiare puts it, if you're comfortable within the arts world, you're likely to make choices that confirm your worldview. If your work ends up being male, pale, and stale, it won't look to those on the outside as if the arts belong to them. They won't try to get in, so the circle stays closed. For things to change long term, they need to become more uncomfortable at the top. We have to open up access to power and to resources. And in a way, there's been good news and bad news. We have, as I said, some outstanding leaders from minorities. We need more. But the doorway into the arts can be hard to find. Beyond it, there are few pathways for progression and many economic dead ends. It's a frustrating experience. And looking up, many see the white cliff face of the arts establishment and feel they cannot climb it. So they try to find access through one of the smaller companies that champion minority and black artists' work. Some of these are companies with 51% BME leadership, which the Arts Council has made a point of benchmarking as a measure of progress in diversity over the last decade. But there, as Madani from the Bush points out, they run into a leadership bottleneck. Because as he puts it, the responsibility for diversity, which should be everybody's responsibility, has been abandoned to a few companies. So these are, in effect, oversubscribed. And so aspiring minority artists and the leaders we need can feel they've been scripted out of this story by those who run the establishment. So there are 2 things here that I want to make very clear. The first is that from now on, responsibility for promoting diversity within the leadership, workforce, programming, and audiences must belong to all our funded arts organizations. And in a minute, I'll be talking a bit more about how we do that. Secondly, there's been an unfair responsibility for diversity conferred on a limited number of organizations. These organizations have often been the more vulnerable ones with relatively small funding grants. As I said, some of them are the diverse-led, so-called diverse-led organizations with 51% benchmark of disabled or BME representation at board and senior management level. And for too long, we've judged our progress with diverse leadership in relation to these specific organizations. They've done and will continue to do excellent work. But focusing just on these organizations has diverted our attention from promoting change across the whole arts sector. And the criteria of 51% that defines these organizations, and by which we have measured overall progress, doesn't necessarily capture the contribution of companies like Baby People in Derby or the Mighty Creatives in Leicester, who are recruiting and training a new generation of board members from diverse backgrounds. Nor can it include the successes of individuals like Madani or Kuli or Indu, who are bringing fresh perspectives to organizations of local and national importance, but which are not, according to that 51% benchmark, diverse-led. But when I talk about the accomplishments of these individuals, I'm not offering them as a fig leaf to cover some of our historic shortcomings. I know from my own experience in television how there's been a temptation to push successful minority candidates, for instance, in front of the camera, and how that can be a substitute for real change of culture. Too often, talented Black and Asian recruits have been thrust into performing instead of being encouraged to progress towards leadership. We need to promote real role models with real power. And the Arts Council's 51% construct has allowed people to think, as Madani puts it, that diversity is a black problem, or that disability, for that matter, is an issue for disabled people, to be resolved on the margins by organizations that are the least resourced. My colleague on our National Council, David Bryan, whom I'm pleased is here today, has rightly said that if that were all we did, it could become a cul-de-sac. Measuring how we're doing remains important. But from now on, we're going to make sure diversity is truly the responsibility of everyone and every organization. The context for this, we think, is urgent. Our last investment round for national portfolio organizations, as you know, NPOs are our larger funded organizations, the investment round saw a drop in the number of applicants from those benchmark BME and disability-led organizations. Some areas of the country had no new applications at all. If I thought the reason for that was that more ethnic, minority, deaf and disabled artists had already successfully entered the mainstream, I'd be pleased. But that's not the case. Government figures for the overall creative and cultural workforce show that it's more white now than in 2008-09, up from 92% to 93%. That's the entire creative sector. In this context, our national portfolio organizations are making some progress. Our equality analysis, which, as you know, we've been carrying out for some time, quality analysis of our national portfolio from 2012-13 shows that overall representation from Black and minority ethnic groups is currently 13%, not far off the current national average of 15%. On the face of it, that does compare favorably with television, for example. But the headline figure doesn't tell the whole story. Firstly, this diversity doesn't extend to management, where fewer than 1 in 10 come from a BME background. And secondly, our collection of statistics is not comprehensive for reasons I'll come to in a minute. And when we look at our figures for our Grants for the Arts programme, funded, as you know, via our lottery monies, funding more than 3,000 small organizations and individual artists, we've seen there another decline in Black and minority ethnic applications and a substantial fall in applications from disabled people. So there's something happening there at a fundamental level. Perhaps there are wider social and economic contexts that have put these groups on the back foot. We don't have the specific data, but we need to find out. There have been, for example, changes to the government's access to work and independent living funds, and I know these are of great concern to many disabled and deaf artists. Indeed, I heard some spirited debates on that subject in Liverpool at Dada Fest last week. As we upgrade our application systems, we'll be doing more to help people apply and ensure that their applications are eligible. That's an important piece of work we have to do in the context of Grants for the Arts. But above all, there are embedded cultural issues that we must address to make the arts genuinely accessible. We have to make it clear that they belong to everyone through the very nature of the work that they do. So this brings me to the fundamental shift I referred to at the beginning. From 2015, measured action on diversity in arts and culture goes mainstream. We've already had plans for this from the 670 NPOs that are being funded from March 2015 to 2018. They've all signed up to what we call the Creative Case for Diversity. This is their commitment to make their work appeal across their communities. Call it accessible programming, if you like. The creative case requires that diversity is not seen as an obligation, but as an opportunity, a long-term asset that will enhance talent, resilience, and income. It demands that our arts make progress in reflecting the nature of our communities, giving a voice to everyone, irrespective of background, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, age, and disability. We expect the bigger organizations to play a leading role here. And I'm very pleased today we'll hear from the leaders of some of our major companies, including ENB and the National Theatre, who will be telling us how the creative case will shape their work. But we're clear that all MPOs will have a plan for the creative case, and this is a sea change in our approach. During the application process, we've made initial ratings of these plans, and we've been encouraged. 80% were found to be good or strong. We'll be revisiting those ratings when we see organizations' business plans over the next few weeks. Of course, a plan is not the work itself, but we're building a new approach to public engagement here, and it's a major construction process. It needs a very sound plan to start with, but now we expect organizations to see those plans through. Some people may ask, why don't you adopt the 3 ticks checklist used by the BFI? It's a good question. And the answer is that the variety of work and local projects we support, especially through Grants for the Arts, is simply too various for a one-size-fits-all 3 ticks process. As I've just illustrated, diversity is an evolving agenda that's particular to local communities. So it's best for us to encourage more quality applications from the widest field and let communities tell us what their diversity is, rather than us impose ideas on them. And to help us reach the parts that other funds don't reach, we're also committing an additional £6 million for extra support. This money will fund more work in support of diversity. There will, for example, be a dedicated Creative Case Commissioning Fund. And we'll be investing a further £1.8 million in Unlimited, enabling them to develop their work with deaf and disabled artists across the country going forward. That extra money for diversity is also going to fund the processes that produce the work. It's going to fuel the creative, intellectual, and practical connections that will be required across the country. We need people who will spread good practice, agents for change, we're going to call them, working across organizations, bringing people and ideas together, and enabling creative evolution throughout the national portfolio. And yes, there will also be conferences, maybe even some symposia. But I believe that far from being dry and procedural, these will be challenging and exciting occasions. We need fora that will connect organizations of different scales and bring the best resource together with those that are best connected on the street. We must remember that while many companies have been working in depth with diversity for years, others are going to find this new territory. I'm also pleased that we're going to set aside specific funds to promote talent and diversity outside the national portfolio. The details of this are being worked on at the moment. We're also commissioning research into diversity challenges faced by museums. We know that a lot is expected of the creative case. Its progress will be watched in the wider world. We'll be monitoring ourselves, and of course, we'll be then making a commitment to publishing that. We don't want our account of it to be anecdotal. That won't help us make the case for funding to government. It won't persuade the public. So to assess progress, we're going to need better data. We'll be seeing how we can improve and widen the data we collect. We'll be looking at new ways of assessing the makeup of audiences. And we'll be reporting in greater detail on progress with the workforce and how we're offering real career pathways, not just a taste of the arts to those from minorities, but the whole meal. Our funded organizations have all been required to implement equality action plans, of course, for some time. But from 2015, we'll also be publishing workforce diversity data for individual MPOs and major partner museums. But we have that issue with data I referred to earlier, and it's a bit of a problem. An increasing number of the workforce we survey, currently as many as 20%, choose not to identify themselves in any particular category. Now, they're perfectly entitled to do this, but it makes it difficult to demonstrate verifiable progress. So we need to understand why this is and see if we can persuade them otherwise. There will be incentives and encouragement, but ultimately, there has to be a reckoning. The progress our funded organizations make with the diversity of their programs, their audiences, their artists, and their workforce will inform the decisions we take on the membership of the next MPO portfolio in 2018. If you've read page 3 of The Guardian today, this event and speech is reported. In the headline, it's reported as a sort of stick, but I was at pains, and if you can keep going to the middle of the article, I was at pains to point out to the writer of the article, the journalist, that I don't see it as a stick, I see it as a carrot. I do see this as an opportunity, not as a threat. This is about making our work better. It's drawing on all talents, as I said earlier. It is a carrot, not a stick. Now, as the creative case rolls out, we'll continue with our current support for diversity. Up to 2018, our Creative People and Places programme, which, as you know, is for areas of low arts take-up, will deploy a further £25 million. Strategic touring will target at the needs of specific audiences. Just to give you an insight into that, last year around a quarter of the shows funded to tour were for culturally specific audiences, so it is a significant part of the picture. The Creative Employment Programme that I think most of you are familiar with will continue to offer the opportunity of paid internships in arts and cultural organisations so that young people can have a fair chance when there's no bank of mum and dad. And we'll keep investing in our future leaders through our support of the CLAW Leadership Programme. So, let me conclude, because as you know we have a good, rich panel discussion to follow. Let me conclude and remind you of two simple points. When we invest public money in arts and culture, it must be for the benefit of all the public. And to deliver the most exciting, inspirational, and yes, excellent art for everyone, we must draw on the best talent from every part of our country and think about every aspect of our work and how it is all interrelated. How the diversity of our programming gives ownership to our audiences, how that will inspire young talent, and how they'll become our future generation of cultural leaders. The Arts Council, of course, is not the creator, it's the facilitator. It depends on the commitment of our world-class arts and cultural organisations. I believe we have that commitment, so let's make it happen. We really can do this. If we make this work, diversity, and I'm talking 10 years from now, will no longer be an aspiration, it'll be a reality. Young talent, whatever its background or class, will see the kind of work that convinces them that the arts do belong to them and that they have a way into them. They will seek careers on the technical side, in administration, as performers, creators, and crucially as leaders. If we do this properly, we'll have flourishing centres of creativity throughout our cities with work that inspires, enriches, and broadens our horizons. Creative work that liberates the energy of the nation. We can't give people creative talent, but we can and must give those with talent creative opportunities. The arts are, indeed, it's often been said, but it's true, the arts are a mirror for society. If we sort this, the arts won't have to make the case for diversity. The arts will simply be the case. Thank you very much.